Alright, so people, big weekend of boxing, really a 24-hour stretch of boxing. In the morning, we will have Naoya Inoue versus Jindo Nakatani, an absolute Japanese super fight between two pound stars. Later on in the day, the more UK kind of time, we will have Conor Walker versus Sam Eggington. Conor Walker being a very strong contender, Sam Eggington being a grizzled veteran who's always in good fights. That should be a really, really great fight. And later on in the night, one of the more compelling fights in boxing, in my opinion, will be the topic of this video, my prediction for David Benavidez versus Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez. Now, I absolutely love this fight, and I've absolutely loved it since the day it was announced. I liked it when it was being speculated about. I really, really, really love this fight. I think it's an incredibly interesting clash of styles. I think it is, a 65-35 kind of fight. I definitely favour Benavidez heavily, and I'll get into why. Yeah, man, this is a fucking really, really good fight. Of course, we all know what David Benavidez. Most of us should know Gilberto Ramirez. There's probably a few of you that don't, which is fine. Both men are exceptional fighters. David Benavidez, of course, being a 2-division world champion. Currently, of course, being the former WBC super middleweight champion and being the current WBC light heavyweight champion, unless that has changed. But I don't assume it has yet. Gilberto Ramirez being a unified cruiserweight champion of the world, picking up I believe he's got BoxRec only lists him as having the WBO at the moment, which is weird. I think he's the WBO and WA champion currently. That's throwing me off a little bit. Yeah, man. So these are two exceptional talents. David Benavidez, in my opinion, is an elite talent. Gilberto Ramirez is right below an elite talent. Yeah, first of all, I think we should get into the resumes of both men. First of all, starting off with the champion, Gilberto Ramirez, who has an incredibly impressive record on paper of 48-1 with 30 wins come by way of knockout. He started off as a super middleweight, very similar to David Benavidez. Has now is a very well-sized cruiserweight at this point in his career. Was actually huge for the super middleweight division. Has a few good wins. He's actually a former. I didn't actually remember that. I didn't realise he was a super middleweight champion. With a few good wins, actually. Arthur Abraham, Jesse Hart, not bad wins. Actually, I don't know how that slipped my mind. He defended that title quite a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A few defenders. Yeah, I didn't realise that. I guess it makes sense. But I definitely think the really, really impressive work has come at the cruiserweight division. A division he, kind of rules at the minute on paper. I think the best cruiserweight in the world is Jay Apataya, but fucking Gilberto Ramirez has more belts, so he's done very, very well. His only loss is to the great Dimitri Bivol, where he had some success early, but was mainly scored just a bit too slow for Dimitri Bivol. No shame in that loss. Bivol was, an exceptional talent. After that, he went on to beat Joe Smith Jr., who definitely wasn't his prime self in that fight. Being a very good light heavyweight back in his day, but I believe this fight was a cruiserweight. Very good fighter in his day. At this point, probably wasn't the best. But then beat Arzin Gulamarian, who was a very, very good champion at cruiserweight. Was undefeated going into that fight, and I believe Ramirez got a minor upset over Gulamarian. So that's kind of where we start to see the resume start to build for Gilberto Ramirez. Moving on from that, he beat, decently regarded champion Chris Smith for the WBO title, unifying WBA and WO titles. Chris Smith at the time was on a pretty decent run, going into that fight, he had a record of 20-1. Had beaten Lawrence Okoli for the WBO title in an absolute stinker of a fight. I think that really came down to him just knowing Okoli so well from the gym, but it was a very messy, very poor, terrible fight. Defended the title against Mateusz Masztanek, who's a very, very good fighter. Had a lot of trouble in that fight. Masztanek retired due to rib injury, which I found weird. I viewed that as Masztanek's kind of last shot at a world title. A fight he was up in, had a really good foothold in, and and I didn't really see anything significant to the body to, pull him out of that fight. But it was what it was. The clearest total defence for Crispin and Smith out of the two he did have was definitely over Richard Riakporhe, who was very underwhelming that night. So there are asterisks to pretty much all of his title wins, but Richard Riakporhe was very, very poor that night, but since then has looked pretty good at heavyweight. Just won the British heavyweight title over Jamie TKV. Bennett Smith, of course, then lost to Gilberto Ramirez, and pretty clearly, but had a very good first round, but that seems to just be Ramirez reading him. As soon as he read him, it was game over for the always game and tough Crispin Smith. A little bit of inactivity from Ramirez, but he then beat Junio Dorticos, who is still around, still has a decent record of 27-2. Dorticos back in the day was a bit of a formidable fighter at cruiserweight. I believe he picked up a world title. He picked up the world title, but he was kind of from that golden age of cruiserweights. He lost to the likes of Murat Gassiev, Bredes. He was in the that little golden period where Alexander Usyk ruled the division, but where the division was really at its strongest in history, and that is his last win going into this fight. David Benavidez, on the other hand, went pro very young at 16. And considering he's been quote unquote the boogeyman in his career, he's actually had a very decent little resume. I believe the first kind of a notable win came against Anthony Durrell, who I believe was the worst out of the brothers between Andre and himself, but was not a bad fighter, was 33 1-1 at the time. That's where David Benavidez, I believe, he picked up the WBC World Super Middleweight title, or that might have been his first defence of it. I do think he won earlier than that, but that might have been his second or first defence of it. Beat David Lemieux in what was an absolute beatdown. Then beat Caleb Plant, which is his first, I would say, really, really impressive win. Did struggle early, didn't get the stoppage. Definitely picked it up late and did really, really well late. A lot of people would say, in comparison to Canelo's performance, it wasn't so great, but it was a fine performance. Really good. One of his best performances to date has been against Demetrius Andrade, who he stopped in a few rounds, 4 or 5 rounds, I believe. Andrade was 32-0 at this point, had been the super welterweight champion. I don't know if he picked up a belt at middleweight. I think he was a super welterweight champion. He was seen as a bit of a boogeyman himself. They were both kind of boogeymen, let's just say. Demetrius Andrade had been around for a very long time, had looked really exceptional in some fights. Like I said, hadn't really had... He'd been on big platforms, but hadn't really been on... but hadn't really kind of had the big fights, if that makes sense. He'd been on big platforms, but he hadn't really had the big fights. He nearly did against Billy Joe Saunders, I believe, but never quite got the big fight. Beat some good names like Liam Williams, for example, but never really got that kind of fight that catapulted him. Hasn't actually fought since that David Benavidez fight. Is probably done at this point in his career, which is a shame, but David Benavidez retired him in 6 rounds, in a literal sense, more than likely. And really, really impressive performance from David Benavidez, one of his better performances. Moving on, we get his move up to the light heavyweight division against Alexander Vostik, which is considered one of his more unimpressive performances. I was never that unimpressed with it. I thought it was a very good performance. I just think Alexander Vostik is an exceptional boxer, and I believe that's why he kind of struggled. Early on, I thought Benavidez looked really good. He came out quicker than usual, and I think that gave Vostik more time, more opportunity to figure him out, which is why Vostik kind of picked it up late and did pretty good late. But I thought Benavidez looked very good early offensively, looked very good defensively, in my opinion. This is where his defense really started to shine. And moving on from there, we had his fight against David Morrell. David Morrell, in my opinion, is an exceptional talent. Came as a fight with a record of 11-0. Hasn't quite capitalised on his talent. his win over Kalajdzic's aging very well, considering it was a fairly unimpressive performance. I did struggle last time out against Ayman Kataev, who was a good fighter. This was a great fight. Morrell gave Benavidez some real trouble in there. Dropped Benavidez in round 11. Morrell's always going to be tricky for anyone. He's a slick Cuban southpaw who tends to like to keep it aggressive, and is a very, big puncher. Moving on from there, we had his fight against Anthony Yarde, which I covered, which I thought was an incredibly impressive performance. I just think the work rate and just the tenacity, the ring generalship, being able to dictate where the fight goes was just superb. I'd have this as David Benavidez' best performance. This, David Lemieux or Demetrius Andrade, for me, are his best performances. And it's a good omen going into this fight with Gilberto Ramirez, but on paper, this is a fascinating clash of styles, You got Zurdo Ramirez, the Mexican southpaw, 6'2", 75-inch reach, against David Benavidez, who is, the American with Mexican roots, who's also 6'2", with a 74.5-inch reach. One guy's a unified cruiserweight champion, WBO and WBA. One guy's the light heavyweight champion of the world, with the WBC. Obviously, age being on the side of Benavidez, with him being 29. We get into it stylistically. You got Gilberto Ramirez, who, in my opinion, is a very solid kind of 7 out of 10 in all areas of boxing. He's not the quickest. He's got pretty good feet. They're not the quickest, but he uses them very, very well. Keeps his shape very well. Keeps a very nice high guard. Will throw in combinations despite him not being the quickest. He's just a very good boxer. Kind of has this trick he uses, which he uses against people very well, where he kind of takes a step back, level changes, feints a jab, level changes again, and digs down to the body. I actually think that could prove very, very, very beneficial against the very soft body David Benavidez, who doesn't carry the most muscle in the world. Actually, neither of these guys carry the most amount of muscle in the world, which is why I think it's a very, very intelligent fight for David Benavidez, because at the end of the day, despite Gilberto Ramirez being pretty well-sized cruiserweight, at the end of the day, this is a fight between two blown-up super middleweights in reality, which is why I think David Benavidez will be able to execute his game plan, which will be to come forward, heavy pressure like he always does, cut the ring off like he does pretty well, and just work. Gilberto Ramirez was caught in the corners against Chris Smith a fair bit. I think against the likes of David Benavidez, he'll just be too tenacious, too vicious, he's just going to throw punches and munches. His work rate is incredibly impressive, and I just think Gilberto Ramirez is too slow, not powerful enough to get the respect of David Benavidez and put this fight in a place where he really needs to be backing up David Benavidez. Is what you need to do against a pressure fighter like with the likes of David Benavidez. Benavidez has skills. He can box off the back foot a little bit, but it's definitely not where he's at his strongest. I think if Gilberto Ramirez was a stronger puncher, which, bear this in mind, he has no stoppages at the cruiserweight division, he'd be able to take advantages of a few things in David Benavidez's game, like the fact that even though Benavidez cuts the ring off very well, he really doesn't keep his shape very good with his feet. He crosses his feet over, he brings them together. I think if Gilberto Ramirez is a bit of a stronger puncher, he'd be able to time that. If he was a bit of a stronger puncher and a bit quicker, right? Because he'd be able to quick enough to get his hands to the target before Benavidez regains his form, let's say. If he was a bit of a harder puncher, he'd be able to time Benavidez when he kind of crosses his feet, makes those fundamental errors with how he keeps his shape, knock Benavidez off balance, which would make it a lot easier to kind of escape the bad positions that Benavidez may put him in, and then back Benavidez up, which I just don't think is possible. Maybe it is, because let's be honest, Ramirez is definitely going to be more, even though I've said it is a fight between two blown up super middleweights, big super middleweights, but two super middleweights, he is definitely the more seasoned cruiserweight. Of course, he's been in the division for longer. He will be more acclimatized to being at super middleweight, Benavidez will be used to taking punches from a cruiserweight. Maybe that could play a factor. Maybe Ramirez will look a bit, more powerful than he's looked in the past. But Benavidez has shown some exceptional defensive variety recently, in my opinion, which really, really pairs well against his offensive variety, where he throws really awkward punch sequences. For, like I've mentioned in the past, a right hook to the body followed by a right uppercut. It's just shit you don't see, and he'll throw it rapidly as well. That's the one thing about this fight as well, is I said they're both going to look soft, they're flabby a little bit. They're going to both be carrying a bit of extra skin. They're not going to be muscular at all. Benavidez seems to be able to use that and has a very good gas tank. So does Ramirez, but Benavidez still was very fast twitch. It doesn't slow him down whatsoever. Whereas Ramirez, he's definitely slow. I just think I just don't see it. I don't see Ramirez having the necessary. I think the skill set is there, the attributes aren't, right? I could see him winning, but I think with the defensive variety that Benavidez has shown, where he parries shots, he has a high guard, he does move his head, like he showed that in the Vostik fight, he can move his head pretty good. I just don't think, even if he isn't acclimatised to taking the punches at cruiserweight, which I don't think will be a problem, I just don't think he'll be able to get that respect. Ramirez, I just think Benavidez will either be able to take it or will either be able to get out of the way of it, because I do believe he'll be the more athletic fighter, unless the weight has dramatically slowed him down. But I do believe he'll be the more athletic fighter and have a significant edge there. I just think it would be a very, very rough night for Gilberto Ramirez. I'm not sure he gets stopped. Like I said, there are a few things he can do to maybe slow down Benavidez, like that level change kind of feint he does where he takes a little step back, drops the level, throws a throwaway jab and then stabs down to the body. If you're catching Bivol with that, you're going to catch Benavidez with that. With Benavidez having a soft body and his work rate being his really, really outstanding factor, maybe, but I don't think that's enough to win a fight. I think that's something you can adapt to if you're David Benavidez, and I think he will. So yeah, my pick is with David Benavidez by decision, probably. I wouldn't rule it out, him being able to grind down Ramirez, put him in corners, dig down to the body and stop him. Maybe with body shots, but I see Ramirez surviving and David Benavidez being crowned the unified cruiserweight champion, being a 3-division champion, and I think putting him firmly in pound for pound discussions. But yeah, man, stay tuned. Later in the week, I'll do a reaction to each of the fights this week, and I'll do a prediction for Inoue Nakatani probably tomorrow, if I had to take a guess. But yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye. Yeah, no, I'll do this video will be Joshua Fury Tuesday, this Wednesday, Thursday Inoue Nakatani. Alright, yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye.